of aesthetic integrity, what scope or significance can my story possibly have? Once the public censorship process begins, there is no easy matter stopping it. How will I gain any public support to write this story? Viewed dispassionately, it might be seen to offend everyone. Opera lovers especially, traditionalists, but also, and not exclusively, for I may have left some faction out, the handicapped, women, smokers, the city of Los Angeles, actors, actresses, scriptwriters, opera singers, opera producers, politicians, organized crime factions, detectives with or without raincoats, the makers of a wide variety of commercial products, prominent baseball legends, television producers, rock groups, restaurateurs, Mills College, religious groups who find the idea of a curse repugnant, people who find the allusion to sexual relations between an older man and a 16-year-old girl offensive beyond mention, popular nightclub entertainers, people who dislike my writing. But let me say this. Why do these censoring factions think they know better than I do about this? Who is playing the maestro? Why do I even allow the possibility of censorship and recrimination to enter my mind? If anyone should say to me that I can modify the details of my conception just a wee bit in order to accommodate this or that special interest group, real or imagined, possible or fantasy, I reply that I don't understand this kind of thinking. And I say frankly that my writing, whether wonderful or disgusting, linger on that, whether hilarious or offensive, brilliant or insipid, is never written at random. I always try to give it character, context, and a certain comic spirit. All around me I see possible interference to this project. The inability of my obtaining an NEA grant in the first place, let alone that my hand would not sign the oath. Disapproving publishers, demagogue politicians, hostile audiences at public readings, people who may assail me on the streets at random, people who may, for no good reason at all, desire my autograph. The possibility of causing injury to my friends and loved ones and those whom I admire and respect. Censorship, prohibition, proscription, restriction, interdiction, exclusion, removal of permission, inside as well as outside, all around me is censorship. I am cursed in truth. My artistic conscience will not allow me to set this opera to fiction. And of course you'll find it in page 148 of a book someone wrote. The next story I'd like to give you a little taste of is called Such Dear Ecstasy. And it's based on the great bel canto maestro Vincenzo Bellini, who died shortly after writing I Puritani, his last, and for many, his greatest opera, in Paris. It was the sensation of Paris, and Bellini, barely 33, died quite surprisingly. Before that, he was mysteriously absent from Paris, and his friends were very worried about it. My story is set in Paris in 1835 and goes into the present, into Bellini's mind, his friends' minds, and into the characters of his opera. The weather was not to be believed. Of all the days to have traveled on horseback, at last the skies grew so dreary that the oil lamps were ignited. Baron d'Aquino bid his respects and set out on his return trip to Paris by way of Puteaux. He arrived at 10 minutes after 5, completely drenched by the driving rain, at the Levis Villa. Aside from the turbulent storm, there was an utter and absolute silence in the vicinity of the Levis home. The air was cold and unpleasant. Baron D'Aquino was thoroughly uncomfortable. Once again, he knocked at the house, but there was no answer. Looking all around him, he pushed sharply and suddenly at the gate, that solemn barrier to his sincere purpose. It gave way with a hollow creak, and D'Aquino walked in carefully. Pausing to tie up his horse, he entered the house. Inside, the villa seemed completely abandoned. The ostentatious decor and vile bric-a-brac that he encountered along his path had at one time been a source of gentle amusement, as Bellini would nod at this item or the next and roll his eyes. But now, by himself, the presence of these objects was unnerving. His steps creaked as he proceeded up the stairs, his hand firmly on the balustrade. Outside, he heard the pestilent wind and the still fierce rain. The silence was heavy, encompassing. He made the turn into Bellini's room and was relieved to see the familiar Sicilian accoutrements, so reminiscent of their shared sunny homeland. He found Bellini on the bed, sleeping. D'Aquino took note of his friend's noble and graceful person, his blonde and curly locks, his distinctive placidity of expression. He was deeply touched at the serenity of this room, despite the weather, moved by the presence of Bellini's grace and gentility. Outside the windows, the rain pelted the gardens unmercifully. The Seine roared by in turbulent abandon. An air from I Puritani entered his mind. Son salvo, al fin son salvo. I am safe. At last I am safe. Here in Bellini's room. An elusive and delicate sense of airiness overcame D'Aquino. For the first time in days, his dark spirits lifted. He turned from the window and sat on the edge of his friend's bed. Smiling, he reached over to grasp Bellini's hand. It was ice cold. D'Aquino veritably leapt from the bed. Incredulous, he was unable to accept the hideous truth. Bellini was dead. How could he have failed to observe this? The room, the rain, the singular persistent grating of the shutter against the window in the wind, the uncharacteristic swirl of the spread that only partially covered his friend's figure as if in a tableau, the horrid, pestilent silence that was everywhere. Dead, dead, how could this be? And where in the world were the people of the house? In the silence, D'Aquino grasped the fingers of ice, and tears coursed down his face. Son salvo.